When Germany struck in 1940, the Netherlands had almost no tanks and few armored vehicles. Outgunned, outnumbered, and facing one of the most mechanized armies in history, Dutch forces had to make every machine count. Yet through innovation, improvisation, and courage, Dutch forces deployed every machine they had, from obsolete French tanks to improvised gun trucks. In music, a fight for survival. This is the complete record. We start with tanks. Renault FT. Acquired after World War I, the Renault FT served primarily as a training tank for Dutch forces in the interwar period. By 1940, it was obsolete and not combat-ready, its riveted armor and 37-gun hopelessly outmatched by German panzers. Yet it remains the only formal tank type operated by the Netherlands before the German invasion. Music. The Renault FT represented the Netherlands' earliest armored capabilities, and the enormous gap between Dutch mechanization and the German blitzkrieg bearing down on them. Marmon Harrington CTLS-4 TAC. This American-built light tank was rushed into service in the Dutch East Indies in early 1942 as Japanese forces advanced across Southeast Asia. Lightly armored and prone to mechanical breakdowns in tropical conditions, the Marmon Harrington was one of the few armored vehicles defending the colony when invasion came. Music. Dutch crews fought desperate rearguard actions in these machines, knowing they were overmatched but refusing to yield ground without a fight. It was a symbol of defiance in the face of overwhelming force. Vickers Carden Lloyd light tank. A British design evaluated by Dutch colonial forces during the interwar period, the Vickers Carden Lloyd was purchased in extremely small numbers for trials. These tankettes were never meant for frontline combat. They were reconnaissance and training vehicles at best. But their presence reflected the Netherlands' limited attempts at modernizing its mechanized capability before Japanese expansion and the outbreak of global conflict. Music. Even these tiny machines represented hope that Dutch forces could adapt to modern armored warfare. Hope that would be tested brutally in 1940 and 1942. M3A1 Stuart. After the fall of the Netherlands and years of occupation, Dutch armored personnel regrouped under Allied command and operated the M3A1 Stuart during liberation operations in Europe. Its speed, reliability, and 37-gun allowed Dutch crews to regain a presence on the battlefield after years of exile. Music. For Dutch tankers, climbing into a Stuart meant more than driving a tank. It meant reclaiming their nation's honor and fighting their way home. M4A4 Sherman. Dutch personnel embedded within British and Canadian armored formations operated Sherman tanks during the final campaigns in Northwest Europe. Its 75-gun provided effective firepower, and its mobility allowed Dutch crews to push into their own homeland as liberators. Music. The Sherman symbolized the re-emergence of Dutch mechanized forces after 5 years of occupation, and the determination to see their country free again. M24 Chaffee. Near the war's end, Dutch units began transitioning to modern reconnaissance tanks like the M24 Chaffee. Though it saw limited action before German surrender, it represented the modernization of Dutch armored forces and a return to mechanized combat capability after liberation. The Chaffee was a promise that the Netherlands would never again be caught unprepared. Music. M3 Stuart planned allocation. Modernization plans for Dutch East Indies defenses included deliveries of American light tanks like the M3 Stuart, intended to strengthen colonial armored forces before the Japanese threat materialized. But those deliveries were disrupted by the outbreak of war in the Pacific. Music. The Stuarts never arrived in time. These planned allocations highlighted the Netherlands' desperate attempts to reinforce its colonies, and the cruel reality that time had run out. Now let's talk about tank destroyers. 47 Berthler anti-tank gun truck. Mounted on trucks for mobility during the 1940 campaign, these improvised vehicles provided limited mobile anti-armor defense against advancing German panzers. Lightly armored, in fact, barely armored at all, they were a desperate attempt to counter tanks with existing resources while retaining speed and flexibility. Dutch gun crews knew these trucks offered almost no protection, but they manned them anyway, racing to firing positions and engaging German armor with whatever they had. M10 Achilles. Dutch personnel operating with British armored units used the M10 Achilles tank destroyer in Western Europe during the liberation campaigns. Armed with the fearsome 17-pounder gun, it allowed Dutch crews to engage even heavy German tanks effectively. The Achilles provided the firepower Dutch forces had lacked in 1940, and the satisfaction of destroying the same panzers that had once rolled over their homeland. M18 Hellcat. Operating within Allied formations, Dutch soldiers crewing the M18 Hellcat used its extreme speed and 76 gun to perform fast, mobile anti-tank operations. Its agility allowed hit-and-run tactics against German armor during key offensive operations across Europe. For Dutch crews used to being on the defensive, the Hellcat gave them a weapon that could hunt, not just survive. 6-pounder Porty. In Southeast Asia, Dutch forces mounted 6-pounder anti-tank guns on trucks to rapidly redeploy against Japanese advances. These improvised gun trucks were vital for mobile defense in jungle terrain despite offering almost no crew protection. They highlighted Dutch ingenuity under pressure, taking what little they had and turning it into a fighting platform. 17-pounder self-propelled system. Dutch crews serving in British anti-tank units operated self-propelled platforms mounting the powerful 17-pounder gun. These vehicles offered heavy firepower capable of defeating German Panthers and Tigers at combat range. They made Dutch gunners among the most dangerous threats on the Northwest European battlefield during the final push into Germany. Now moving to armored cars and half-tracks. DAF M39 Panzerwagen. The most advanced armored car in Dutch service in 1940, the M39 featured a 37-gun and innovative dual driving controls for rapid retreats. Limited production meant only a handful could be deployed during the German invasion. Yet these vehicles provided critical mobility and firepower against German advanced units, fighting actions that bought time for Dutch forces to regroup and evacuate. Landsverk M36 Panzerwagen. Purchased from Sweden, this armored car offered reconnaissance and light support capabilities to Dutch forces. Though lightly armored, it allowed Dutch units to conduct scouting and limited offensive operations. The M36 represented one of the few modern mechanized assets available during the 1940 campaign, and Dutch crews pushed them to their absolute limits. Landsverk M38 Panzerwagen. An improved Swedish armored car ordered shortly before the invasion, some M38 vehicles arrived too late to influence the campaign. They reflected the Netherlands' frantic attempts to modernize its mechanized forces under impossibly tight timelines and limited industrial capacity, a race against time that the nation ultimately lost. Overvalwagen. A Dutch improvised armored car built on commercial truck chassis and equipped with machine guns, the Overvalwagen demonstrated emergency mobilization and battlefield creativity. Hastily constructed as German forces crossed the border, it allowed crews to engage German infantry with mobile protection. It was rough, unpolished, and desperate, but it was Dutch, and it fought. M3 half-truck. During liberation operations, Dutch forces used the M3 half-track to transport infantry safely and provide fire support on European battlefields. Its mobility and protection allowed Dutch units to regain mechanized operational capacity within Allied formations. For Dutch soldiers who had fought on foot or in exile for years, the half-track meant they could finally fight as a modern mechanized force again. Universal Carrier. Compact and versatile, the Universal Carrier handled reconnaissance, transport, and light support roles for Dutch troops integrated with British forces. Its small size and track design made it highly maneuverable across European battlefield terrain during liberation campaigns. Dutch crews used these nimble machines to scout ahead, deliver supplies, and evacuate wounded, proving that even the smallest vehicles could make the biggest difference. Now the last are motorcycles. FN M12. Belgian FN motorcycles were used extensively for dispatch, reconnaissance, and military police duties. Reliable, durable, and simple to maintain, they were an essential component of Dutch military communications and mobility during both pre-war training and the desperate days of May 1940. When radio networks collapsed under German jamming and bombardment, motorcycle couriers kept Dutch units connected. Harley-Davidson WLA. Supplied through Allied channels, these rugged American motorcycles supported Dutch personnel operating in Britain and later during liberation campaigns. Fast and mechanically robust, they excelled in courier and escort roles. Dutch dispatch riders raced across European roads on Harleys, carrying orders that would bring their country closer to freedom with every mile. BSA M20. British BSA M20 motorcycles were widely used by Dutch troops operating with Allied forces. They provided reliable transportation for dispatch riders and reconnaissance units, proving durable and easy to maintain under harsh combat conditions across Europe. Simple, dependable, and everywhere. The BSA kept Dutch forces moving when everything else failed. Indian 741. Used by Dutch personnel integrated into Allied formations, the Indian 741 supported liaison and escort missions. Its compact size and reliable performance made it effective for communication and light transport during late-war operations. Even in the final days of the war, Dutch riders on Indian motorcycles were racing between units, coordinating the last pushes that would finally drive German forces from Dutch soil. The Netherlands entered World War II with almost nothing, a handful of obsolete tanks, improvised gun trucks, and sheer determination. But Dutch forces fought with everything they had, and when liberation came, they returned stronger, mechanized, and unbroken. From Renault trainers to Sherman liberators, every vehicle tells the story of a nation that refused to surrender its future.